Welcome to Is That All There Is? I'm Paul Alnesian, and I'd like to say a few words about my upcoming book and this site. To begin with, I'd like to address the issue of reincarnation as far as the overall perception of it is concerned. Most people think that reincarnation has to do with the Eastern religions, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism. Or that if one is a Christian, that person should not be believing in reincarnation because the Bible doesn't say so, or the Bible may be even opposed to it. And I have answers to all of those in my book and spread throughout the website in blog articles, so I cannot address those in detail in this welcome message. But I can assure you the truth is not what people believe in generally. And we have a lot of evidence to that effect. Reincarnation in today's environment, with what we have grown to discover and learn, especially from science, medicine, and psychiatry in particular, we really have a lot of circumstantial evidence, corroborating evidence, and it is not a matter of simply belief. It is not a matter of being a New Age follower, or some people call that woo-woo believers, woo-woo book readers, or the airy-fairy topics. It isn't any of that. I wouldn't be interested if it was just a matter of faith. There is a very tiny amount of faith that one should have, just as we have faith that when we go to sleep at night we are going to wake up the next morning, typically. So my approach to reincarnation has been extremely pragmatic, practical, and I've been interested only in the benefits that I can derive and everyone else can derive. And my conclusion came as a result of decades, I would say, of questioning why things happened the way they did, and why there didn't seem to be any fairness, justice, especially coming from a Christian perspective. And I finally came to that conclusion, and I found my answers. And it was so compelling that I felt obligated to drop my other projects and really write this, get it out of my system and out of my chest, share it with people. Hopefully, as many people as possible will benefit from it, just as I benefited from it. And before I go any further, I'd like to share an example that I've thought of, which clearly highlights as to how practical it is in our lives and what it really means. It is not a matter of faith. For me, it is the most important thing we should know about life should start with reincarnation, the understanding of that, the law of reincarnation. Maybe the planetary law, just like we have the law of gravity. Gravity is really extremely important. Obviously, life wouldn't exist as we know it without it. But reincarnation probably is the next most important, or very close in importance, a law that is extremely important for us to understand. And we've been in the dark ages when it comes to this. So, here's my example. Suppose you, the viewer, were living in a town, say, of 50 or 100,000 people, anywhere in the world. And in that town, there is, let's assume, high infant mortality. There is a high percentage of deformed births, a much higher percentage in death through or because of leukemia and cancer, a much higher percentage in that town than the average for that area, say, for that part of the state or that part of the country. And whether it's infant mortality, higher than the norm, life expectancy, much shorter than the norm, and people who are there, they have obviously a lower quality of life. So let's assume doctors come and experts come, and everybody researches, and they do experiments, they do surveys, and they do studies on all the sick people, and they look at their water, they look at their nutrition habits, and everything seems to be normal according to them, and they finally get a conclusion, which is typically, and we hear things like this very often, that there is not enough scientific evidence to assume that there is anything out of the ordinary happening in this town. And the government puts its own stamp of approval and says, yes, we have looked at it, sorry, our scientific evidence today, or the extent of science that we have, cannot evidence anything, cannot find evidence of anything. So it moves on. What happens to you and everyone else in that town? People are suffering, but they have to accept that as the norm. After a while, they either leave town or they just accept it. They live with it, and they accept a quality of life, let's say, devoid of energy, purpose, because when you see so many people suffering and unexplained, you probably even feel victimized as to why has God singled you out. So you live that way. And suppose right before you die, you discover, or some scientist or some new discoveries finally concludes irrefutably that the cause of everybody's misery in that town was there all the time, is still there today, and maybe the reason it was suppressed is because nobody wanted the big utility company that operates through that town, or a big utility company in that state. They didn't want that company to have to incur billions of dollars in damages payable to people who lived in that town if it were to be discovered that they were causing it. And they say, finally and ultimately say, they conclude that the cause of it was the high tension wires that ran through the town. And locals always suspected, because even their radios didn't operate well as they were driving by those high tension wires. It was always a noise, a crackling noise, and the reception was bad. So it is discovered that that is so. So what do you do? How would you feel if you discover right before your death that you were really you were kept in the dark and indirectly victimized? You were deprived of the quality of life that you could otherwise have lived. I think you would be mad and angry. So, and that example, being deprived of information and knowledge that is so critical and important to our daily lives, is really similar to what happens with reincarnation. And that's why I parallel those two ideas together. Reincarnation really is the essence, the meaning, the justification of everything that happens in our lives. It gives purpose to our lives. It explains it all. And once we understand the explanation for how things happen, everything becomes a lot more bearable. So reincarnation is an extremely essential knowledge, and we have been kept in the dark until now, and we shouldn't accept it anymore. And those who have kept us in the dark have a personal self-interest in it, and they have manipulated us of sorts, just like the people in that town would justifiably consider themselves having been manipulated. because you can always fudge the numbers, and scientists are very frequently doing things like that. And let's not go too far. If you just listen to the news, one day you hear a survey that says coffee is extremely good for you, and 2 weeks later you hear that coffee is the cause of such and such ailment and illness. Then they say, oh, coffee can do this, so-and-so, and then the opposing idea. Every time you pay a scientist to do some research, it's a very well-known fact that it's a human nature. We will always find the answers that we are seeking. We will research, and the answers we expect to find, we will always find. And that's very well-known and accepted knowledge in even scientific circles too, by the way. So what the thinker wants to prove, we will be able to prove. Basically, it boils down to that. So my request and invitation to all of you is to consider the possibility. You don't take my word for it right away. Just consider the possibility that there may be merit to reincarnation well beyond religion. I'm not trying to convert your religion. I haven't converted my religion. So consider that, and let us look at how we can use it to improve the quality of our lives, the lives of our nation and our world, because it is really affecting everyone. So that's my invitation for you, and there are numerous articles that I've written. I think you will see them as an extremely illuminating and giving you a perspective that is a little out of the ordinary. So thank you again for viewing, and I hope you'll continue visiting the website.